Hi, this is Cheryl Gallant, your Conservative Member of Parliament for the riding familiar with military training exercises, Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke. Yesterday, the Prime Minister faced some tough questions in the House of Commons. 7 years into the job, and Trudeau just usually ignores the questions and repeats the cliche his sayings that his staff gives him. This isn't what happened yesterday, though. During question period, I asked the Prime Minister why military spy planes were flying over the Freedom Convoy demonstrators last February. Then my friend and colleague, Kerry-Lynne Findlay, got up and pressed the Prime Minister for an answer. Trudeau does not like being challenged by women, so he ended his question by calling us effing idiots. Let's take a look.
Member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, the government must invoke the National Defence Act to use the military for civilian law enforcement. The government insists it did not deploy the military during the February demonstrations in Ottawa. Now we know surveillance flights were conducted over Ottawa at that time. Did the government invoke any statute to deploy the Canadian Armed Forces in this manner, or was the surveillance conducted without lawful authority?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the flight in question was part of a Canadian Armed Forces training exercise that was planned prior to and was unrelated to the convoy protest. Now, Mr. Speaker, I think this is a perfect example where the official opposition in this country needs to be very careful about spreading.
I'll get you. Order. I'll let the Prime Minister restart. Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Here is the facts, Mr. Speaker. The flight in question was part of a Canadian Armed Forces training exercise that was planned prior to and was unrelated to the convoy protest. That's the fact, Mr. Speaker. Now, what the official opposition is playing with right here is dangerously close to misinformation and disinformation when they choose to make political hay out of something that could be concerning to many people if it were true, but is simply not. And I think it's important, and it behooves all of us in this House to demonstrate responsible leadership in how we move forward.
The Honourable Member for South Surrey.
This is not the first time Trudeau's lost his composure and swore at somebody in the House of Commons. It's just another sign of his disrespect for Parliament and democracy. When reporters asked him about it after question period, Trudeau quoted his father's lame excuse for cursing in Parliament, and the media gobbled it up. One Toronto Star journalist even found Trudeau's misogyny hilarious. Why did Trudeau lose his composure? If, as Trudeau claims, these spy plane flights were just training exercises, why is he so upset to be asked about it? As a member of Parliament for the largest military base in Canada, I know firsthand the importance of military training exercises. The regular training of our armed forces is critical to our national security. But as everyone knows, military training exercises can also be a euphemism for covert operations. Look at the Russian conscripts who were told they were going to Ukraine for military training exercises. But let me be clear. It doesn't matter if it was an actual training exercise. It doesn't matter if it had been scheduled months in advance. The facts on the ground demanded that the training be rescheduled or relocated, if, in fact, it was training. The fact that Trudeau immediately called these questions misinformation, once again, demonstrates why no government should ever be in charge of determining what is true and or not true. A real Prime Minister would never expect Canadians to just accept him at his word on an issue like this. The Prime Minister has every incentive to lie in this kind of situation. He knows that if he lies, he can cover it up by claiming national security. If Trudeau really, truly cared about combating misinformation, he'd release all the records regarding these flights. When were they scheduled? Oh, what activities were undertaken? What training was conducted? What data was gathered? If this was actually a training exercise, then there are no national security issues with releasing this type of information. The problem for the government is they've already cited national security as one of the reasons they invoked the Emergencies Act. Now, despite the fantasies of some CBC news anchors, there was no Russian plot. There was no funding from foreign governments. The Freedom Convoy was an organic, grassroots Canadian phenomenon. It was a reaction to the cruel, inhumane, and arbitrary, unconstitutional federal mandates. It was a reaction to the ugly, divisive, hateful campaign Trudeau waged against a minority of Canadians. It wasn't an insurgency. It was not a national security threat. It was an act of civil disobedience by marginalized Canadians. Yet Trudeau says it was a national security threat. Suppose for a second we believe Trudeau. Suppose you were Prime Minister and you truly believed Canada's national security was threatened by the bouncy castles and dance parties. If you really and truly believed that, wouldn't you deploy electronic reconnaissance? Wouldn't that be the responsible thing to do? Trudeau is lying to have it both ways. He needs Canadians to believe that it was significant enough a national security threat to justify his use of the Emergencies Act, but not so significant that deploying a spy plane would be a reasonable action. It's clear that Trudeau can't keep his lies straight, even in his head, which is why he gets angry, acts immaturely, and curses at women who ask him tough questions. Well, no matter what Trudeau says or does, you can trust that I won't stop asking the hard questions. Live from Ottawa, this is Cheryl Gallant.